incomes were stagnant throughout this period. And so for many people, it wasn't taking equity out to go to Europe to spend on some frivolous item. It was to maintain a lifestyle or keep, their income at a level that they could actually live. So there was a lot of equity extraction that was not based upon, buying or consumerism or something that was frivolous. I think that one of the most poisonous paradoxes that we found in our reporting for the book was that the very people that the government was claiming to want to help, first-time home buyers, minorities, immigrants, or the people who were hurt the most by this crisis. If you look at foreclosure rates among minorities, far higher. If you look at delinquency rates and problem mortgages and bankruptcy filings, it's really so much worse among these very people.
You've also written extensively about how the government has failed to prosecute. We started this segment talking about a prominent Wall Street analyst predicting this week not a single top executive at Goldman Sachs will face criminal prosecution for the company's role in the financial meltdown. Talk about that.
Well, of course, not being a prosecutor, it's very difficult for me to really understand what goes through their minds when they bring cases or investigate. But I think that there is a genuine sense out there that there are two sets of rules, one for big and powerful institutions that are deemed to be too politically interconnected or powerful to fail, and the rest of us, Main Street. And I think that feeds that's a very pernicious view. And unfortunately, if you don't have investigations and if you don't have cases being brought, that view will continue. In the S&L crisis, for example, many, many people went to jail. High-level executives went to jail. CEOs went to jail. And to have a crisis that was this much larger than that one, and to have no one go to jail, is very troubling to a lot of people.
And part of that really is, to reiterate what Gretchen said, this view that if we really investigate, if we really find wrongdoing by senior executives at these firms who now are too big to fail, we're going to risk destabilizing the system. That's really the psyche.
And how much of it is, well, for example, President Obama will be hopes to raise more than $1 billion for the 2012 election cycle to become president again. And the people he surrounds himself by, the very people involved in 2008 in the financial meltdown.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the original point we were talking about this public-private partnership with home ownership and how Fannie Mae co-opted Congress. It's, again, that story. And so I think it's quite disturbing to many people.
I'm curious about your sense of the role of the news media as this crisis unfolded, because it seems to me that throughout the 90s, many of the newspapers and of course you had the growth of business networks and cable, the business sections of the newspapers grew, but they grew basically as cheerleaders for the industry, rewriting the press releases of the analysts, not really doing independent reporting and analysis or investigations of what was going on in the business world. Now, after the whole thing collapses, now there's lots of reporters saying, hey, the government should have done this, but where were those reporters when the crisis was developing?
Excellent, excellent point. I have myself taken on a lot of these individuals and institutions well before others, and believe me, it's not easy. They're very powerful. They come at you with guns blazing, and I totally get that. That's fine. But I think there was a sense among a lot of my colleagues in the press that of a collegiality with people, almost that you wanted to be invited to the parties, and instead of being outside with your nose pressed up against the glass, which is where I'd rather be. You wanted to be in the mix with the CEOs. There's this sense of adulation. There's a sense that if the CEO takes your call, that you're, sort of, increasing in your own power. I think that's a very hypnotic effect that happens in the media.
Let's talk about how all of this affects average Americans. In the face of the massive budget shortfalls, calls are mounting across the country for wealthy individuals and corporations to pay a greater share of taxes. Here in New York City, hundreds rallied at City Hall yesterday, demanding officials close tax loopholes and regulate financial practices instead of targeting the public sector with layoffs and budget cuts. Protesters cut a symbolic Social Security net to represent the effects of cuts to vital services. This is a Brooklyn resident, Bobby Talbert.
major corporations and the big banks are getting tremendous tax breaks. They're getting bailed out, and they have tremendous amount of loopholes as far as financial is concerned. Meanwhile, services are being cut for marginalized families and even for the working class in New York City.
Gretchen Morgenson.
He's absolutely right. And again, this is this feeling that the bailouts benefited Wall Street, they benefited corporate America, and did not benefit Main Street. I think from the very outset of this crisis and the government's reaction to it, we have had that feeling, and Main Street has been left out in the cold. The foreclosure programs are abysmal. The banks are not responding in a way that everyone had hoped they would. So I completely agree.
Lloyd Blankfein told you he felt waterboarded?
That was, yes, the word.
Explain the conversation, what was happening at the time, and then I want to ask you about Fabrice Touré.
I think that what Mr. Blankfein meant was that he just felt, overwhelmed by the public attention. I think that they felt at Goldman Sachs, and he had said this at one point, that they were doing the Lord's work or God's work. And I'm going to take him at his word if he really believes that. And, I think that financial institutions are important. They are an intermediary. We need to have banks. I'm not saying let's get rid of them. But I think that tells you a little bit about his mindset. And, many, many CEOs live in a bubble. They're not used to having people speak truth to them. And so I think that was his reaction. But I don't know. I'm not in his brain.
And Touré?
This was a 28-year-old individual, seemed pretty junior in the organization chart.
He's the only guy being brought up in charges. We just have 30 seconds.
Yes, he's the only guy being brought up in charges. And so you just once again wonder, why aren't more people further up the ladder being singled out or focused upon?
Finally, your solution, what you think needs to happen.
Well, I think we need to address the foreclosure problem immediately. We need to have the banks, I think, face the music about what kinds of assets they own that they are not accurately reporting on their value. And I think that we have to try to balance it out between Main Street and Wall Street, Josh.